The wind screamed, and the rain tapped steadily against the windows, filling the room with sound. A small fire crackled in the fireplace, providing a bit of warmth but not enough to chase away the cold that had settled in. The lights flickered from time to time, creating long, spooky shadows on the walls. Outside, everything was a blur of gray, with the rain pouring down continuously and chillingly. "Let me share something with you," I said, leaning closer, my voice calm but quiet. "There are things lurking in the dark that we don't fully grasp, things that linger at the edges of what we see. They don't always come from tales or films. Sometimes, they are part of real life." It was a calm evening, similar to this one. My friend, Sarah, had just moved into a small apartment in the city center. She was thrilled, finally, her own place, away from her controlling parents. Yet, from the moment she walked in, something felt off about the apartment. It was inexpensive, located on the upper floor of an old building that hadn't been updated much. There was a narrow hallway with a long, cracked mirror at the end. Sarah wasn't one to believe in superstitions, but there was something creepy about that mirror. It was huge, almost too big for the narrow space, and its surface was chipped and uneven. It felt like it was waiting to reveal something to her. One evening, after a tiring day at work, Sarah settled in her living room to read. The rain had started lightly but quickly turned into a downpour, pounding against the windows. She looked up, and for a brief moment, she thought she noticed movement in the hallway mirror. A figure, just out of the corner of her eye, a woman, standing still. Curious, Sarah got up and walked to the hallway. She peered into the mirror but saw nothing. Shrugging it off, she went back to her chair and kept reading. Later that night, she woke up to the sound of quiet footsteps in the hallway. Her heart raced as she checked the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. It was too late for any visitors. The rain continued to pour heavily, and the house creaked around her. Slowly, she turned her head toward the hallway. There, in front of the mirror, stood the same woman. This time, Sarah could see her face, pale, blank, with dark, hollow eyes. The woman was completely still, staring back at Sarah with a strange calmness. Sarah screamed, and in a flash, the woman disappeared. But the reflection stayed. She rushed to the door, locked it, and called her friends in a panic. Of course, no one believed her. But after that night, Sarah moved out of the apartment within a week. She claimed she never saw the woman again, but she insisted that whenever she walked past a mirror, the reflection seemed strange, just for a moment. Like something was always watching her. There's an old, forgotten path that winds through the woods near my grandmother's house. It's the kind of path that most people wouldn't think to take, overgrown, hard to see, and filled with thick, heavy trees. We were always warned to stay away from it, but being young and rebellious, my cousin Jake and I decided to explore it one evening. We had heard the tales, the stories claiming that the woods were haunted, that something odd happened to those who wandered too far in. People said they could hear voices, starting as soft whispers and then becoming louder and closer. And if you followed those whispers, you would never return. We brushed it off, thinking it was just a tale. As the night went on, the clouds began to form, and the rain started to lightly fall as we walked deeper into the woods. The air felt heavy, and the smell of damp earth filled our noses. Soon, we noticed something odd, a silence in the air, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then we heard the whispers. At first, they were faint, hardly noticeable. Turn back. Go home. We assumed it was just the wind. But as we kept moving, the voices grew louder and clearer. We froze when one voice rang out clearly. "Jake, come closer." I looked for Jake, but he was gone. Fear washed over me as I realized he had gone ahead while I was distracted. "Jake?" I shouted, but there was no reply. Only the whispers. I pushed through the trees, following the sound of his voice, and found him standing still in the middle of the path. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his face was pale. "Jake? What's wrong?" He didn't answer. Then, I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, coming from just behind me. "It's too late. She's waiting." I turned, but there was nothing there. Just trees, dark and silent. I grabbed Jake's arm and ran, pulling him back toward the edge of the woods. When we finally reached the safety of the house, he snapped out of his daze, eyes wide, but he wouldn't talk about what had just happened. Years later, after Jake had gone to college, he finally shared something unsettling. That night, he didn't hear me calling his name. Instead, he heard something else, something sinister. It whispered his name and made a promise to him. There's a subway station I used to visit every night after work. It's one of those older stations that doesn't get much use. The lights above often flicker, and the platform is usually empty except for a few tired workers. One rainy night, similar to tonight, I missed the last train home. The platform was deserted except for me and a single figure standing at the far end. He wore a long coat, and shadows covered his face. At that moment, I didn't think much of him, assuming he was just another late-night traveler. When the train finally showed up, something felt strange. The doors opened, and the man entered as if he had been waiting for it. He didn't glance back, he just walked slowly down the car, fading into the dim light of the train. I took a seat, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my back. But something was definitely wrong. I looked up and caught a glimpse of his face in the reflection of the window. It wasn't just that he had a cold, lifeless gaze, his reflection wasn't moving in sync with him. He was staring right at me, and he had been watching me the whole time. Fear rushed through me, and I jumped up, heading for the door just as the train's lights flickered. I needed to get off at the next stop, but when the doors opened, all I saw was darkness. There was no platform, no lights, just emptiness. I turned and ran to the front of the train to find the conductor, but when I glanced back at the rear of the car, I saw the man standing there. His face was twisted into a smile that was too wide and unnatural. He raised his hand, and then, nothing happened. The train screeched to a stop, and I jumped out, never daring to look back. I haven't taken that train again since. The rain kept pouring, and the storm swallowed the world outside. The fire crackled softly as the last stories hung in the air, creating a heavy, uneasy silence between us. I took a deep breath, feeling the chill seep into my bones. There are things, I said softly, that never really leave you, even after you try to leave them behind.